Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking, they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. The phone rang just after midnight in the home of the director of the Bureau of Waterworks and Supply for the city of Los Angeles. It was March 12, 1928. A rushed voice told the chief that the St. Francis Dam was even now collapsing ferociously into the canyon below it. The 185-foot curved concrete behemoth in the San Francisquito Canyon had been in service for only 2 years. It had been built to hold back 38,000 acre-feet of water for the city's imminent use. The director knew that the water that had been held back by the dam would now never reach city taps, but would drown a lot of whatever lived between it and the concrete rubble the dam now was. Because, among other things, he knew what an acre-foot of water meant in real terms. Hint, it's the amount of water that it would take to cover 1 acre of land to a depth of 1 foot. I'll do the hard work here. That's 325,851 gallons of water per acre foot. So the dam, at capacity, which it was that night, had held more than 12 billion gallons of water. Billion with a B. Only a few minutes before, at 2.5 minutes before midnight, the lights in LA had briefly flickered, but the chief wouldn't have noticed. He'd been asleep when the world he had so carefully nurtured came apart, literally, at the seams. That dam had been built explicitly to hold a year's worth of water for the growing metropolis of Los Angeles, which, truth be told, was nothing but a parched desert town that ran headlong into the Pacific Ocean before he got there, a barren land that glistened in the sunshine that banked against mountains, all of it prone to drought and could, at best, support very little beyond cattle. He believed in that dam. And now it was, as he spoke to the man on the phone, sending water, something like 1 million gallons a second, over crushed concrete and rubble piles into the canyon below, picking up everything in its path and shoving it farther toward the city. Mud, houses, bodies, oil wells, oil, animals, and scrub. A massive, wet, thick sludge wall was being shoved forward by the water behind it and onto the 10,000 souls who probably never heard it coming. Located just 54 miles from Los Angeles, the dam had held water that would later be determined to have shoved bodies so far as to drop them, without stopping, into the cold Pacific Ocean. The St. Francis Dam collapse would become the worst engineering disaster in American history. Barely 2 weeks later, the authorities began an inquiry into the calamity. Explains John Wilkman, author of Floodpath.
It's not a criminal trial. It was a trial to determine who was responsible and to determine if they were going to indict anybody. It's quite possible that William Mulholland would have been indicted for murder.
William Mulholland, the unqualified hero of the great city, would, maybe for the first time ever, be asked to account for his actions. By the time the inquiry opened, he already knew that 227 bodies had been unearthed from the muck and mire. He also knew that hundreds were still missing. For those wondering, the exact number of dead, the official estimate is at least 431, would be forever cloaked in mystery as many migrant families worked and lived in temporary shelters along the aqueduct, grateful for the jobs that had blossomed so regularly in the agricultural splendor that the water had brought the San Fernando Valley. So yeah, if this was murder, it was murder on a grand scale. At first, Mulholland was less than forthcoming, but the weight of the tragedy hung heavy around his shoulders, something he could not shift to others. This is from PBS.
If there is any error in human judgment, Mulholland admitted, I was the human. I won't try to fasten it on anybody else.
He was not being noble. Mulholland knew that he had designed that dam without much, if any, consultation. He knew that he had even expanded its original design to carry more load. He knew that he had been called to inspect the site the morning of the tragedy to look for himself at the leaks that had been plugged and the slight bulging of the giant curving edifice. He had gone, he had seen, he had then considered the concerns of those who worked on the dam. He knew all dams leak. So he had assured everyone that very day that the dam was safe. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Faye Nutrition. I am finally starting to eat better.
I know. You're shooting down my meal suggestion.
It's true. It's not always easy making better decisions for myself, but I'm doing it. And just today, I started the process of working with Faye Nutrition to help show me the way. Faye is a revolutionary platform that connects you with your own personal registered dietitian. So whether you're looking for help losing weight, improving your general health, or managing a health condition, Faye has a dietitian that's right for you.
You did that today?
I did. I hopped online, gave my hometown an insurance overview, and boom, they gave me 48 dietitians that meet my criteria.
93% of Faye clients reported an improved relationship with food, and 85% reached their target weight. A third-party study showed that clients lost 2.9 times more weight working with a dietitian through Faye compared to comparable weight loss programs.
Achieve lasting results with the help of a registered dietitian through Faye. Listeners of Crimes of the Centuries can qualify to see a registered dietitian for as little as $0 by visiting faynutrition.com/COTC.
That's faynutrition.com/COTC.
One last time, that's faynutrition.com/COTC, and make sure you use the URL so they know I sent you. If you know Los Angeles, you know that one of the most scenic drives that the city has to offer is Mulholland Drive, a 21-mile road that is known as a tourist overlook, a lover's lane, and a road racer's paradise. It's on this drive that you get a view of the basin, the valley, downtown, and the Hollywood sign. You know the view. You've seen it in dozens of movies. The Mulholland Dam is up there too, in the Hollywood Hills, and holds the Hollywood Reservoir. Mulholland Highway is a 50-mile scenic road that runs from the Santa Monica Mountains down to the Pacific Coast Highway, where LA and Ventura County lines meet. Mulholland Memorial Fountain is a glorious reflecting pool that is tiled in turquoise and includes a slice of the original LA Aqueduct. It's poised at the busy intersection of Los Feliz Boulevard and Riverside Drive. And there's even a Mulholland Middle School, a public school of no particular renown. This is no mistake. William Mulholland made this city. And that's no understatement. He got to LA in 1877 after living off his wits and hard work, having never finished grade school. He had left his Dublin home when he was just 15, working as a seaman in the British Merchant Navy for a few years before trying his luck in the United States. From New York, he went to Michigan to work the Great Lakes, then to Ohio to log, to California, where he was a pretty unsuccessful gold miner, only to land a job in Los Angeles, digging ditches on the ancient and inefficient city water supply system that issued forth less than pristine water. But he fell in love with the LA River, a trickle of a river that runs slowly out of what is now Canoga Park and used to spread out to marsh in what is now basically San Pedro. That is, until it rains. That's when it becomes a torrent that has historically caused disastrous flooding. It was the primary source of fresh water for the city early on. Here's what Mulholland had to say about the river via LA public TV station KCET and their Los Angeles History Project.
It was so attractive to me that it at once became something about which my whole scheme of life was woven.
In 1877, he was 22 and the population of the city was around 9,000. Mulholland worked various jobs, all in some sort of municipal water distribution. At 30, when his boss dropped dead, he was made superintendent of the Los Angeles City Water Company. It's legend, but true, that he worked his way up by memorizing the entire water and sewer main system, every pipe and drain, teaching himself classical hydraulic engineering as he went. He wasn't a guy who forgot where he came from, said geological engineer J. David Rogers.
He starts out as a ditch digger. I mean, you can't start out any lower, than that. But that's what made him such a good field general. He understands the working man and how to marshal their efforts. That was what he lived for.
His job, at least when he started, was to embrace efforts to conserve water, pointing out unnecessary waste everywhere in the city. Because, good God, there was so little of it. And water, that is. Between 1838 and 1902, the average rainfall in the LA basin was less than 3 inches a year. Average annual rainfall now is something like 12 inches a year. Some years, like in 1960 to 61, the city had less than 5, and others, like 1992 to 93, had almost 24. But such great rain years are invariably followed by hideous fire seasons as the rain encourages undergrowth in the hills to flourish. When the dry season returns, that flourishing becomes fuel for fast-moving fires. I hardly have to tell you how devastating that becomes when the Santa Ana winds rage. Anyway, Mulholland was in charge when the city, having survived 3 years of drought, began to panic as the LA River was running dry. Knowing that he couldn't create water, he and a good friend, former Mayor Fred Eaton, took a buckboard and a lot of whiskey and drove north out of the city looking for a sustainable water source, which, soon enough, he would find. And he would steal. Mark Reisner, the author of an astonishingly great book, Cadillac Desert, spoke of the decision.
And I think Mulholland suddenly must have changed. And he saw himself as a sort of builder of a Roman masterwork, as somebody who kept the great hydraulic engineering tradition alive. I can't tell you what went through his head, but suddenly he was a convert. Having been more of an efficiency guy and a conservationist, suddenly he became an empire builder, almost overnight.
I introduce this note now as we are a true crime podcast, and while I posited mass murder at the outset, I don't wish to overlook what many serious-minded people see as a crime of equal, if not larger proportion, also committed by William Mulholland with the help of a lot of serious capitalists. How else do you adequately characterize how LA got its water to grow and how it continues to get it today? By what swindle or con did Mulholland and Eaton make the desert bloom, the world turn west, and why the Rose Bowl and its glorious parade on every New Year's Day creates a hankering in the rest of us to suddenly move there? Suffice to say that the two men found, just 200 miles from home, the Owens River Valley and the seemingly abundant Owens Lake, which had been formed by mountain runoff. Not to be too political here, but this was already somebody else's home when the pair happened upon it. Here, pioneering farmers had already decided to plumb the water they too had found and irrigate their Inyo County land to build families, grow apples, water their animals, and thrive, as did the Paiutes, the Native Americans who preceded them. They could have simply asked to share. They chose instead to go to the Inyo County Courthouse and find who owned what and strategize from there, using everything from maps to stream flows to mask what can only be called greed. Quietly, and without much notice, Eaton bought up property and water rights. So too did other in-the-know entrepreneurs like Harrison Gray Otis and Harry Chandler, owners of the Los Angeles Times, big supporters of the project when it finally went public. Meanwhile, no one in the Owens Valley had an inkling they were selling their land and water rights to Los Angeles, nor did they realize that Mulholland had envisioned a giant garden hose that would shuttle the water away from their orchards and straight into the Sportsman Lodge bar in the form of bourbon and water. Eaton was such a greedy pig, he even bought the land where his friend Bill Mulholland had told him dams could be located. That would be a good investment, he figured. He neglected to inform Bill that he was, in effect, insider trading. The aqueduct Mulholland imagined would flow through the San Fernando Valley, also something bought up by a real estate syndicate that figured where there were now cattle, there could be lots and lots of oranges, and lemons, tomatoes, walnuts, lima beans, and table grapes. They paid $35 an acre for it in the 20th century's first decade. Google tells me that an acre there would now cost me well over $1 million, depending on location, zoning, and development potential, with most prices falling within the range of $1.525 million per acre due to high demand for the land in this densely populated area. I should point out here that Mulholland did not invest personally in the land swindle, if you want to call it that. He was only interested in the water and how he was going to deliver it like a milkman to LA's doorstep every day for decades to come. To do so, of course, those 60,000 acres of irrigated farmland in the Owens Valley were going to be snapped up, soon to be thirsty and, before long, useless again. On July 25, 1905, Mulholland went public, announcing he'd been to the desert and read a sermon in the sand. Water, that precious lifeblood, is just a little more than 200 miles away, he explained to a worried populace. If voters would only agree to fund it, he had this idea of building an aqueduct from here to there, a 12-foot conduit of water that would be driven to Los Angeles by gravity alone to where it could be best used. He rallied the Chamber of Commerce and found solid support in Sacramento for his plan. Even President Theodore Roosevelt signed on, creating the Inyo National Forest, creating, as Mark Reisner explained in his book, Cadillac Desert, the first national forest that had no trees, if you didn't count the apple orchards, which, without water, would soon enough leave the forest leafless. Campaigning for the bond issue to pass, the LA Times exuded confidence in the plan. No wonder that the 250,000 residents of the city, in the midst of a drought, voted 10-1 for the $24.5 million bond to fund the building of the monstrous pipeline. That's about $800 million today, give or take a few tens of millions, though building it today would be far more than that figure. Construction began in 1909. The joke being that all the water department's workmen had to do was follow the whiskey bottles thrown out of the buckboard a few years earlier when the chief in Eaton had taken a month to go water hunting. Mulholland's granddaughter, Catherine, who spoke of him in later years, tried hard to defend his reputation.
The most valuable thing my grandfather had in the building of the aqueduct and the whole planning of the water system was his ability to get along with other people. People really liked him. I mean, he really identified with the working man, the working stiff.
The epic engineering feat included building power generators and cement factories, setting up camps for the workers, channeling through rocks and over mountains, shipping in German-built pipes large enough for trains to run through, medical facilities, food service, and constant construction in conditions that ranged from 0 degrees in winter to 130 in summer. William Mulholland personally oversaw all of it. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Skims. True story, I'm wearing Skims right now.
You are?
This is a Skims bralette.
Look at that.
I put it on before I even remembered today was ad day, so there you go. Feel the fabric. It's really soft and stretchy. It conforms to your body without feeling clingy. I forget I'm wearing it.
Do they have men's stuff?
Why, they do. They have hoodies and sweatshirts, boxers and briefs, tees and tanks, even pajamas.
I'm gonna have to check them out.
The stuff I have is part of Skims Fits Everybody collection, which is just fantastic. The Fits Everybody collection is available in sizes extra, extra small to 4X. You can shop now at skims.com and Skims stores. After you place your order, be sure to let them know I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. The LA aqueduct took 5 years to complete, less than the chief had estimated and under budget by $500,000. On November 5th, 1913, the aqueduct's first day online in the San Fernando Valley, thousands showed up with tin cups to drink the stuff that would save them from being a dinky two-bit backwater. P.S. You can still see that spot, now referred to as the Cascades, a California historical marker, at the intersection of Foothill Boulevard and Balboa Boulevard, just north and west of the city of San Fernando. Okay, so when the floodgates opened, Mulholland's speech basically went like this. There it is. Take it. A bit anticlimactic, sure, but he was tired and had to finish up there to get to the hospital to be with his wife, who was having cancer surgery that day. The 58-year-old Mulholland had become a powerful man in a town that was redefining power in America. Angelenos even wanted him to be mayor, something he not so politely declined. He was easily the best-paid civil servant in California, but he wasn't getting inordinately rich doing his job. And that job included providing the city with hydroelectricity by way of the power plants he'd erected along the aqueduct. So he was equally responsible for the clean energy fueling the ever-burgeoning film industry, the expansion of ship and aircraft manufacturing, and the increased demand for oil and gas production. Oh, and for copious amounts of air conditioning when it was first made available for home use in the late 20s. Maria E. Montoya, an associate professor of history and American studies at the University of Michigan, has spent a lot of time studying the Latino experience in Southern California. She told PBS,
"It's very easy to picture Mulholland as corrupt, but he wasn't doing this because he was getting paid off to do it or he was making money off of it. I think for him, it's really about his own vision and his power and his ability to remake nature. I think that's what's driving him."
Catherine, Mulholland's granddaughter, agreed, but added that
My grandfather had too much power in the sense that it had been given to him. People wanted him to have it. And that's a very beguiling position to be in, to have people give you power. Very hard to say no to that.
the revelry that accompanied the 1913 opening of the floodgates was not appreciated by those who felt Owens Valley had been, at best, misled, and at worst, robbed, raped, and left for dead. LA was the fastest growing city in the world, approaching a population of 1 million. This, of course, meant more need for water and served to step up the city's land buying spree in the Owens Valley. The Great Depression came early in that part of California that included cities like Bishop, Big Pine, Lone Pine, and Independence. Farms dried up and banks were not taking chances to offer farmers a reprieve. People moved away. Schools and churches were emptying out. A few farmers figured they could reason with the folks from the big city. Let us just say they were wrong. Used to having enough water and now fearing a coming drought, the big city dug in. By May of 1924, near the town of Lone Pine, a bunch of the fed-up changed tacks. They dynamited a length of the aqueduct at the Alabama Dam. Employing 500 pounds of dynamite, they sent a clear signal south. Bishop resident Cynthia Irwin is still pretty proud of that.
Talk about community involvement. I know that my grandfather was there. I have spoken recently with my mother's cousin, and she said that she remembers that it was a party, that her mother got her up early, and got her dressed up. And she was only 4. So that was a great step. And those people didn't move from the Alabama gates. They didn't move. That took a lot of courage. It did.
Local papers back up Irwin's account, including that some women cooked for the dynamiters, while others cared for the children on site. Tom Mix, an early Western film star, was making a movie nearby and sent musicians to entertain the bombers. A bunch of local teenage girls formed an orchestra to join them. When the girls weren't there, the men listened to Enrico Caruso on phonographs and their wives sang "Onward, Christian Soldiers." Hopefully not at the same time. Anyway, the irate lawbreakers have been variously reported as numbering 40, 50, and 100. Doesn't matter. They stopped the movement of water, at least temporarily. The news went nationwide, though hardly with the vigor that those locally felt. Mulholland fumed. This was terrorism. He sent a whole raft of men north to uncover the plot, finger the evildoers, and press charges of vandalism. But nobody in that valley talked. It was them against the world. Mulholland even received death threats in the mail. Forced arbitration followed in what must have been an odd standoff, pitting those who had unlawfully behaved by blowing up the aqueduct against the city of L.A., which had rather shiftily absconded with their water. Where was the moral high ground? Did anyone have legal feet to stand on? While the lawyers exchanged memos and filed court briefs, representatives from Los Angeles bought another 2,140 acres of Owens Valley land and successfully got control of 90% of the water rights under dispute. For 7 years, the negotiations slogged on. The aqueduct was dynamited 11 times in the interim. LA managed to slake its thirst with the water after it repaired the breaches and dipped into the wet stuff it had stashed in reservoirs. Nobody was jailed. Mulholland, sure he was right in the regard, hired 600 armed guards to keep the aqueduct safe. The Big Pine Herald at one point reported that, quote, "The defendants in this case, the water owners and the users of this section, are the men who helped build the West," end quote. Yes and no. As the PBS documentary made clear, those so-called good guys who had plowed the valley into lush farmland were the same people who had used violence and deceit to dispossess the Paiutes of the land they had lived on for maybe centuries. Turnabout being fair play? Hard to say. It makes it hard to pinpoint the crime of the century here, but looks like we have a slew of candidates. For now, I'm going to stick with Mulholland, who, despite his finer qualities, showed few qualms in executing his grand scheme. Greater good is a valid argument, I guess. But like the saying goes, Mother Nature always has the final word. That would come soon enough. California's little civil war notwithstanding, we are back to where I started in 1928 in the failure of the dam, which may have been a real crime of negligence. It is no stretch to extend that to negligent homicide. And to what exactly caused what happened in San Francisquito Canyon on that horrible night? For those who know Southern California, the canyon is about 40 miles north and west of downtown LA and about 10 miles north of the city of Santa Clarita. Today, instead of a dam, you'll find a California historical marker indicating that this is the St. Francis Dam disaster site. The dam was something called a gravity dam. That defines loosely how it was built, the way it was curved, and the base on which it stood. It was designed to hold back water by using only the weight of the materials and its resistance against the foundation. Mulholland was very familiar with the terrain at the site. He did not skip the important step of determining the rock composition of both sides of the canyon walls and found the two sides were indeed of different makeup. He then did exploratory drilling and was satisfied that this was a good place for a dam. I mean, it's not like the man just threw a dam up there any which way. He did the work. He did the math. Later, his decisions about appropriateness of the land would be questioned, as some geologists felt that the dam may have been built on the inactive San Francisquito fault line. You know, a place where the earth opens up when a quake shakes the shit out of it. Or, more scientifically, where rigid tectonic plates within the Earth's crust move from time to time to accommodate the movement of magma farther below. I think I got that right. But my point is, fault line, bad. Anyway, he designed this dam as a twin to his first concrete dam, the Mulholland Dam, located closer to town in the Hollywood Hills. Knowing that LA was outpacing its own growth estimates, and that he had already drained Owens Lake dry sometime in 1924, the chief decided to make the St. Francis Dam 10 feet taller without increasing the size of its base. This he added after he'd gotten a thumbs up from his bosses on the design. Though he did add a wing on the western side of the dam to increase the dam's capacity to compensate for the height. That also meant he had added 8,000 acre-feet of water to the load it would have to contain. I won't make you do the math. That's 2.6 billion more gallons of water. Leaks showed up in April 1927 when the water was allowed to accumulate behind the dam. It leaked where the fault line would have intersected with the wing addition. Uh-oh. And yet, the records show that the seepage through 1927 had not been extraordinary. Then came early 1928 when new cracks appeared, and those working on site spent a lot of time plugging leaks. A week before the dam failed, a trusted employee saw that new leaks had occurred and they were not leaking clean water, but muddy water. This meant that the foundation was eroding and water may be undermining the concrete structure. That's when Mulholland and another water department engineer inspected it and decided that because an access road was being built alongside the dam, that was what was muddying the water. The foundation, they said, was in the clear. A week later, they were called out for the last time and gave the dam their seal of approval. Catherine Mulholland explained that she loved her grandfather immensely, but
Grandfather Mulholland was not a sentimentalist. He was a very hard-headed, realistic person, and given the conditions of his childhood and upbringing, it's not hard to understand that. His loyalty to the city and to the water department were unswerving. I think he would have killed for either one.
In 1860, textile manufacturer Pemberton Mills factory in Lawrence, Massachusetts, suddenly lost all of its structural integrity. Hundreds of its workers were caught under the weight of the building. As many as 145 were killed, and 166 more were critically injured. In trying to locate survivors, someone accidentally started a fire by way of a handheld lamp, likely killing more who might have been rescued. What caused the calamity? An inquiry revealed that too much weight on the building's floors, substandard construction, improperly mortared walls, and cheap iron used in the columns that held up the building worked together to force the implosion. Nobody was charged with a crime. In more modern times, in June 1981, 2 overhead walkways that hung from the Hyatt Regency Hotel lobby in Kansas City, Missouri, were overloaded with partygoers and collapsed, killing 114 and injuring 216 more. Those who had constructed the hotel a few years earlier had hurried to make deadlines, skirting necessary oversight of the skywalk design and construction. The engineering company responsible for the structure's failure was convicted of gross negligence and professional misconduct. The company's president took full responsibility. He was not convicted for causing 114 deaths. Which reminds me that the courts of this country are littered with product liability cases where people are injured, even killed, because products explode or malfunction. Examples range from the small and incidental to the 2002 earth-shattering $28 billion in punitive damages awarded to middle-aged Betty Bullock, who contracted lung cancer and argued successfully in a case against Philip Morris that the company had failed to warn her of the risks of smoking. Public policy in these kinds of cases changed dramatically, though still no one went to jail. Until, finally, someone did. In 2014, an architect who built his own home in the Hollywood Hills was sentenced to a year in prison because he drew up plans for and oversaw the interior installation of a fireplace that was meant for outdoor use. When his house caught fire, a Los Angeles firefighter died when the roof collapsed. The homeowner knowingly violated the rules. He lied to house inspectors and then to investigators during their inquiry into the cause of the fire. Business Insurance Magazine wrote that the case was a wake-up call for professional liability for those who build things, which makes me wonder what California would do with William Mulholland today. The utter collapse of the St. Francis Dam is considered the country's worst man-made disaster of the 20th century. It killed more than those who perished in 1906 when an earthquake nearly threw San Francisco into the bay before the fire that followed almost burned it down. Along with the dam, also gone was Mulholland's reputation and his great lifelong belief in himself. He had built so much. The St. Francis was his 19th dam, but it had undone him. The coroner's jury, the one in which he had laid blame on himself, agreed with him, summing up that he was responsible for the deaths of so many and as well as $20 million in property damage. Yes, the report admitted, the foundation of the dam had been flawed from a geological point of view, but someone should have known that. It was also noted that while some traces of dynamite had been found in the rubble, that was not the cause of the collapse. It also wasn't an area of investigation that the city pursued. I mean, to what end, really, except to further incense the locals who were already grieving their dead. The report in history would blame Mulholland's mantle of absolute power in the water department. No dam in the United States would ever be built with so little scrutiny. In fact, Hoover Dam, which was under consideration at the time of the collapse, would be designed by a total of 200 engineers, not just the one, and slowed considerably by the review process it underwent. Construction on it began just 3 years after the St. Francis collapse. No indictment was forthcoming for the chief. The families of those who died downstream from the dam were paid $5,000 each by the city. Mulholland went home, as his granddaughter reported, to quickly retire. He then endured the rest of his life, she said, barely speaking, even to family. In the spring of 1929, the city bulldozed and carried away the remains left at the dam site to erase the memory of the event. But Los Angeles remained, as ever, thirsty. All those new people and their gardens and golf courses, all that vegetation that had been brought from somewhere else and planted and watered enough to thrive. Geez, even the trademark palm trees along Beverly Hills Boulevard were trucked in, as were the bright pink bougainvillea that bloom year-round on the ramps to the Five. In 1934, a year before Mulholland's death at 80, some plans he'd laid out to redirect more water the city's way were given a fresh look. William Witzel, the chairman of the board of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, had sounded the scarcity alarm.
Unless we take immediate steps to bring in water from an outside source, the people of Southern California will be up against a serious water shortage. But we're fortunate in having within our reach a water source capable of supplying our needs. This source is the Colorado River.
Work began, again using Mulholland's map, to blast a conduit to the Arizona state line where the Arizona State Militia stood waiting to stop them. I won't belabor this, but the lawsuit that followed proved to be the longest-running court case in American history, lasting 30 years. Guess who won? The Colorado River Aqueduct now brings water across the Mojave Desert for the benefit of those who live in Southern California. When the chief died in his sleep of a stroke in July 1935, he was laid to view in the rotunda at City Hall. The Los Angeles Times reported that people from all walks of life showed up in throngs to pay their respects. And this, from an inside page on the day of his funeral, quote, "The flow of water in the Owens River Aqueduct, which Mulholland built, was stopped for a moment as it came from the intake in the Owens Valley. Along another great aqueduct line now building, 10,000 men working on the Colorado Aqueduct paused with reverence." End quote. The city school district declared a week in October 1939 as William Mulholland Week so that teachers could spend time teaching little Angelinos about his legacy. And Los Angeles got bigger and stayed thirsty. Throughout the mid-century, LA topped Mono Lake, a lake in eastern California, about mid-state. Extending the existing aqueduct north, the desert lake's three ancient sources of fresh water, Rush Creek, Levining Creek, and Mill Creek, were diverted away from Mono and onto LA. This proved ugly as well. Mono Lake is a saline ecosystem that would only get progressively more so when fresh water was withheld from it. This meant 2 million annual migratory birds were dying and alkali dust storms swept the area. In 1964, there were even some plans floated that would see the aqueduct extend to tap the Columbia River, which I should note actually starts in Canada. The idea was to irrigate Nevada along the way, maybe throw some water to Arizona and Texas. That was scrapped, but not before it got a good airing. In late 1963, the aqueduct's Baldwin Hills Dam burst. Built after the Second World War, it only took 5 lives.
The Los Angeles City Police helicopter is here. The Los Angeles City Fire Department helicopter is here. The police are on the ground with motorcycles and automobiles trying to effectively activate people from here so there can't possibly be any more loss of life than there is. Property, no telling how much property has already been lost.
In 1966, the Feathered River, a tributary of the Sacramento River, was added to the garden hose flowing south. In 1980, good sense and good manners returned. Deals were struck. Los Angeles even had to give back some water to the people of Owens Valley. The movie Chinatown, the 1974 Roman Polanski masterpiece that saw Jack Nicholson get his nose sliced, was a neo-noir fiction which had the Mulholland water grab as backstory. Robert Towne won an Oscar for the screenplay. He had his own take on Mulholland and the man's ultimate place in Los Angeles history.
Some crimes are so monstrous, they can't figure out how to punish them, so they actually sort of reward them. And Mulholland's name is on the scenic route of the city. The criminals' names are on plaques as city founders, rather than in jail where they belonged.
Los Angeles gets its water now, as I said, from the Colorado River Aqueduct, but also from the Owens River, the Mono Lake Basin, the Feather River, and the reservoirs of snowmelt in the Sierra Nevadas. The city is recycling water, capturing stormwater, and has, in recent years, begun to return the LA River to its natural state after decades of being nothing more than a cemented drainage ditch. Children can play in it, fish even swim in it. As for the aqueduct, the original pipeline, it still delivers 1 billion gallons of water a day to the city of 3.8 million and to much of the metro area that includes 12.5 million people. Because the people, well, they have not stopped coming. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read and highly recommends Mark Reisner's Cadillac Desert, a book she read when she first got to Southern California in 1995. She also read The Mirage Factory by Gary Christ and a wide array of stories from the Los Angeles Times, both archival and present day. She watched a slew of documentaries as indicated in the text and waxed nostalgic with her husband about Chinatown. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this show was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com.